Mary, a young peasant woman chosen by God as the mother of his son. In the 2 millennia following Mary's death, thousands have reported experiencing supernatural phenomena known as Marian apparitions. Visits from Mary. Signs and wonders confirming an apparition are said to occur. But can the visionary's claims be authenticated?
Things show up like in the camera lens, whereas you don't see it with your physical eye.
Thousands gather, waiting and praying for visions of Mary. In the 3rd century A.D., Gregory Thaumaturgus, a Christian bishop in Asia Minor, lay in bed unable to sleep. He was troubled over having to write a difficult sermon. Suddenly, 2 people appeared in his bedroom. An older man and a woman who was surrounded by light so bright, Gregory claimed he had to avert his eyes. The couple stood before him and discussed weighty theological issues while he eavesdropped.
He suddenly heard a voice over at the side of the room, a feminine voice, which said, "Go ahead, explain to him about God."
Then the 2 vanished. But from the conversation, Gregory determined their identities. St. John and Mary, the mother of Jesus. Gregory's vision became a religious cornerstone.
This is the first recorded private vision of Mary in history.
An apparition is the appearance of a being in a supernatural state who would normally be beyond detection by the human senses.
St. Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian, maintains that in most cases, this is an inner experience. It's a special grace of God which comes to the individual. Thousands of people may be there at the time, and none of them see it, except the visionary.
Since Gregory's encounter with Mary, Christians around the world have claimed to have experienced Marian apparitions. Among them, a dispirited Indian, an uneducated French nun, poverty-stricken children in France and Bosnia, and a middle-aged woman in the Mojave Desert. Apparitions of Mary remain an especially important part of Catholic culture.
Roman Catholic culture is where belief in Mary is most important. And hence, as you might expect, the largest number of apparitions are to Roman Catholics.
Catholics revere Mary, a Jewish girl from a 1st century backwater village. It is her relationship with God through the birth of Jesus that has so elevated her. The Gospel writer Luke chronicled the moment known as the Annunciation.
The angel Gabriel is sent to a virgin in the town of Nazareth named Mary and announces to her that God is calling her to be the mother of the Messiah, the one who will be called Holy, the Son of God. And she gives her agreement to be able to do that. Without her yes, history could have turned out very differently.
Beyond Mary's role in the birth of Jesus, the Bible contains little information about her origins, family, or death.
There's hardly anything about Mary in the New Testament. There's more about her, in fact, in the Quran than there is in the New Testament. What we do know is the bare bones. That she gave birth to Jesus in a place called Bethlehem, and that at some point she married Joseph.
Yet, perhaps because of the very lack of biblical references, Mary's prominence grew in the hearts and minds of the faithful. She was a mystery, and as such left much to the imagination. By the Middle Ages, devotion to Mary developed into true religious fervor as the fear of Judgment Day swept through Europe. People looked to Mary as the one who could intercede with her Son and gain mercy, especially at the moment of death.
In that kind of fearsome moment in church history, in the Catholic Church, Mary became a zone of mercy. She's the person you could go to because she was a mother, and so she had a mother's heart.
As testimony to the people's love for her, Mary began to be celebrated in the 12th century through ways other than just prayer.
Lady chapels were added to cathedrals. There were more hymns written to and about the Virgin. And apparitions began to be collected. There was an interest in making records of people who reported experiences of the Virgin.
Over the centuries, visionaries' descriptions of Mary's physical appearance in apparitions have remained fairly consistent.
She appears as a young woman in her teens or early 20s. She is dressed in flowing robes, usually white, but sometimes light blue. She will appear floating in the air, and sometimes there are objects around her head that are important: a crown, stars, a flower. Each of these are taken to have different symbolic values.
Sometimes she has dark skin and sometimes she doesn't. Some say that Mary has the capacity to appear to each culture in ways that they will understand, and that she always speaks the language of the people.
The seer usually sees her as a three-dimensional person, an actual real person standing in front of them. Some say she is sort of transparent, semi-transparent, but others say, no, she's flesh and blood and she's standing right there.
Mary's choice of visionary could be puzzling. In the 16th century, her appearance in Mexico to an impoverished, demoralized Indian affected millions. But is the story about this man and his miraculous cloak a myth perpetuated by Christian conquerors?
The faith of people is not dependent on what critics say.
Most of the visions reported in the first millennium of Christianity were experienced by monks, nuns, and hermits. People known for leading exceptionally disciplined religious lives. Later, others who had witnessed Marian apparitions were not especially devout prior to their visions. These seers also seem to come from modest circumstances.
I think it's significant of the dynamics of apparitions that Our Lady always picks someone that society says you're nothing, and Our Lady says you're special.
One special person in the 16th century was a simple Indian man, Cuauhtlactoactizan, whose village was said to be near modern-day Mexico City. The Indian's baptismal name was Juan Diego. He was one of the relatively few Indians to adopt Christianity after the Spanish conquistadors came to the Americas and defeated the Aztec Empire. As the story is told, on December 9th, 1531, Juan Diego was on his way to church when Mary appeared to him. She was enveloped in a golden mist, standing on a sacred Aztec hill, Tepeyac, where a temple to the Aztec goddess Tonantzin once stood. Mary spoke to the awestruck Indian in his native language. She requested that he approach Bishop Juan de Zumarraga to build a shrine on the hilltop where she could help all those who prayed to her.
And so he goes. And of course, he's really not believed, although the bishop, I'm sure, is very pastoral and kind of listens to him.
Dismissed by the bishop, Juan Diego saw Mary on his way home. Overcome by failure, he pleaded with her to send someone more qualified to the bishop. But Mary insisted on Juan Diego as her trusted messenger.
He is now the messenger of the Mother of God. And that really reestablishes the dignity of Juan Diego and of the Indian people.
The next day, the bishop listened more attentively to Juan's message from Mary. Still skeptical, though, he asked for a sign from Mary. On December 12th, she showed Juan Diego a rose bush atop the hill in full bloom. An unusual event in the middle of winter. She instructed him to gather the roses and bring them to the bishop as proof. When Juan Diego appeared before Zumarraga, he opened his cloak, called a tilma, to spread the roses on the floor.
And as the flowers fall to the ground, the image of Our Lady appears on the tilma, as we have it today.
The next day, the bishop listened more attentively to Juan's message from Mary. On December 13th, 1532, Juan Diego was on his way to church when Mary appeared to him. She was enveloped in a golden mist, standing on a sacred Aztec goddess Tonantzin once stood. Mary spoke to the awestruck Indian in his native language. She requested that he approach Bishop Juan de Zumarraga to build a shrine on the hilltop where she could help all those who prayed to her. And so he goes.
I
Known as Our Lady of Guadalupe, the image has had tremendous religious and cultural significance for Mexicans.
This image has been identified as the source for Mexican Christianity. And this image is still alive in the streets of Los Angeles and Brooklyn, Texas, El Paso, New Mexico, even Latin America.
Our Lady of Guadalupe is Mexico's patron saint, and people put her image virtually everywhere.
In the bakery, on taxi cabs, tattooed on young people's arms or on their back, in the names that people carry and give their children.
Today, the tilma is encased in bulletproof glass behind the altar in a basilica built in the 1970s near the site of several earlier churches. Though the tilma is made of cactus fiber that usually decays in a matter of decades, it remains intact nearly 5 centuries later. Even so, its divine nature remains a topic of debate.
To a modern investigator, it couldn't look less like a miracle. It's obviously painted. In some places, the weave of the cloth is obscured by what clearly looks like a layer of thick paint. And you see flaking all down a seam in the picture that looks for all the world like paint.
Some scientific tests cast doubt on the authenticity of the image, while others validate it. Some Guadalupe devotees, though, acknowledge areas have been touched up.
It didn't have a glass for a long time. It was a touch level, and people love to touch. So it has been touched up, that we have no doubts about. But behind, there is a primitive image that does correspond to the basic image of Our Lady of Guadalupe.
Even if the image is man-made, it is still an effective religious and political symbol. Within a few years after the image was made known to the Indians, millions abandoned their old pagan religion and were baptized. Some critics say Guadalupe is a conquistador ruse to deceive and subdue the Indians.
It's interesting that this picture of the Virgin Mary appears looking like a typical Spanish Virgin Mary. She looks very Indian. And the Virgin Mary has chosen, they're told, the site for the church, a site where they have been worshiping, and that's their virgin goddess.
Not surprisingly, Guadalupe supporters disagree.
And I think Our Lady calls the church to a conversion to evangelical Christianity, the Christianity of Jesus, which is a Christianity of mercy, of compassion, of bringing people into the fold.
Another factor fuels the debate. Skeptics argue that there are no written records of Juan Diego's existence prior to 1548. The Church, however, believes that the equivalent of Juan Diego's death certificate was discovered in 1997 by a Spanish Jesuit. A document called the Escalada Codex is drawn on dried animal skin, dated 1548, and features an image of Guadalupe, along with the Indian name of Juan Diego.
It has a few words in Spanish, they're all misspelled, and they feel that adds to the authenticity.
There is also a strong Indian oral tradition about Juan Diego that the Vatican has accepted as reliable.
For people that did not have writing, the oral memory was very sacred. So those oral testimonies are very, very important. I think more and more we're very assured that Juan Diego was indeed a real historical person.
On July 31st, 2002, the Vatican agreed. Juan Diego was declared a saint by Pope John Paul II.
The faith of the people is not dependent on what critics say. I think Guadalupe kind of brings out the best of the people. Gives people a deep sense of pride and dignity. What she did for Juan Diego, she does today.
300 years after her appearance to Juan Diego, Mary, it is believed, helps a nation devastated by revolution. Of all the churches in Paris, France, the Virgin Mary supposedly chose to visit a simple chapel on the Rue de Bac early in the 19th century. The apparition is considered by scholars as the first notable one in the modern era. It also played a role in influencing church dogma. The visionary 24-year-old Catherine Labouré was a nearly illiterate, peasant-born sister of charity. She had a history of seeing apparitions, notably of Jesus and of Saint Vincent de Paul, the founder of her order, who died in 1660. Some believe she was a mystic. Others, a classic example of what psychologists call a fantasy-prone personality.
We're often asked, are they hoaxers or are they delusional? And they're neither. They're not mentally ill, and they may be quite sincere. They're also not reporting on some objective reality that can be measured or proven. And they're different.
On a July night in 1830, Catherine awakened suddenly at the sound of her name.
She saw a luminous child in her room, as the story goes, and this luminous child led her out into the church, where she saw what she later said was the Virgin Mary descending to a velvet chair and talking about coming disaster.
The apparition purportedly gave Catherine some unsettling news. The King of France, Charles X, would lose his throne. Churches would be ruined. Priests would flee. These are, the Virgin said, such evil times.
France was in a great deal of political and social turmoil in the 19th century.
The apparitions in Paris were in the context of the secularization of France, the articulation of separation of church and state, and the loss of power by the church.
The French Catholic Church had, in fact, suffered a significant loss of power during the French Revolution. But the Church was hopeful when France's monarchy was restored. and Charles ascended to the throne in 1824. While the revolutionaries despised religion, Charles was on the side of the church. One of his mottos was, "For altar and throne." King Charles envisioned a future in which Catholicism would regain its lost prestige in France. However, 1 week after Catherine's apparition, Paris erupted in the infamous July Revolution. When a member of Charles's cabinet abolished freedom of the press, thousands marched in the streets. Protests turned into bloody street fights, and French men and women were slain. Catherine was astonished that the Virgin had been right. Churches were destroyed, and bishops were among the imprisoned and the dead. Charles eventually fled to England. In November, amidst France's political, social, and religious turmoil, Catherine Labouré was at an evening church service when she experienced another apparition.
And that was the Virgin manifesting overhead in a beautiful white gown, standing on a white globe, and holding a golden globe between her fingers. Golden letters started forming in the air around her.
They turned out to be a prayer. O Mary, conceived without sin, pray for us who have recourse to thee. Mary supposedly told Catherine to create medals with those words on them. With the help of Catherine's bishop, the first ones were made in the summer of 1832. They were an overnight success, having come along at a time of widespread anxiety and fear.
People felt that it gave them divine favor, that they were having miraculous cures, that they had been saved from fires and illness.
It became known as the miraculous medal. Many scholars credit the medal's popularity with helping prepare the way in 1854 for Pope Pius IX's proclamation of the Immaculate Conception. The Catholic tenet holds that Mary, as noted on the medal, was conceived free of original sin, an idea that has been popular and controversial at least since the Middle Ages.
The argument in favor of that is that it wouldn't be fitting for a woman who had been sinful to be the bearer of the Messiah, Christ, who was sinless and all holy. And Protestants said, you can't expect us to believe this. It's not in the scripture, and we don't agree.
While the medal rose to international fame, Catherine Labouré remained anonymous. She spent years caring for patients in the convent's hospice.
She went out of her way to conceal her own role in the apparitions and go on and do her work, quite apart from any particular fame that the medal obtained.
After writing a private account of her experiences, Catherine died at age 70 in 1876. Her body is enshrined in the Paris chapel. She was declared a saint in 1947 and is credited with helping restore the Church's uncertain hold on French Catholics.
Catherine is seen as being at the fountainhead of the revival that would hit the French church over the next generation or two. In the 19th century, over 200 new religious orders were founded by Roman Catholics in France alone.
In 1846, a village in the French Alps, La Salette, was the site of a significant apparition in which one thing stood out. The seers were children. Beginning with La Salette, children have been essential in Marian apparitions for the last 200 years.
So the question then becomes, why is it that people think children make good visionaries? And that involves a kind of romanticization of childhood. People look at children and they see children as innocent. They see children as unable or unlikely to deceive, and were they to deceive, the idea is that they would not be able to sustain that deception in the face of intense public scrutiny.
However, neither 14-year-old Melanie Calvat nor 11-year-old Maximin Giraud had an ideal childhood.
Both had been abused and or abandoned by their families. They had actually terrible childhoods and difficult family lives, and were indentured servants at the time.
The children were herding cows one day in September. After waking from a midday nap, they went in search of the herd that had wandered off. Looking down into a ravine, they saw a large glowing circle of light that opened to reveal a woman seated on a rock. She was cradling her face in her hands and weeping heavily. Her son, she said, was upset over the villagers' lack of religious devotion. Unless they immediately changed, something disastrous would occur.
She says, you're going to have a famine unless you people, shape up and quit cursing and go to church and so on. So in a sense, the message is not great, but it's different. It's very different. It used to be, build a church on this spot, She didn't say that. She said, shape up. This is a wholly new approach. And La Salette is the first.
The lady urged the children to relay her message to the villagers and instructed Melanie and Maximin to pray every day. The children saw the woman ascend in the ball of light until she drifted out of sight. Afterward, they reported the apparition to their employers.
Then it was reported to the priest, who preached a sermon about it the next morning, and then people began to flock to the site.
The villagers, not the seers, first named the apparition as the Virgin Mary and interpreted her words in light of that identification. The church certainly took it seriously and conducted interviews with the children.
They were totally lacking in grace, and yet even the most skeptical of the priests that interviewed them admitted that when they began to talk about their apparitions, everything about them changed. They suddenly became eloquent in a simple way, and they withstood inquisitions that went on for years.
In the meantime, supernatural events began to occur around the site.
Maximin was requested by two soldiers to bring them a souvenir from the shrine site, and he went and got a stone. And because there were two soldiers and one stone, they hit the stone to break it open so each soldier could have a piece. And inside the stone, they believed that they saw the face of Jesus.
Years after their mystical experience, Melanie and Maximin both devoted themselves to the church, but neither could maintain a religious life.
The visionaries led less than exemplary lives. But the church handled that by saying, well, the visionaries have served their purpose, and it is now the theologians who are in charge of interpreting the vision.
After La Salette, people expected Mary to bring news and issue commands. And there was intense pressure on seers to deliver messages, even when they were of doom and foreboding.
In the modern era, especially in the 20th century, there's also been an apocalyptic message that history is coming to a climax. The evils, the problems, the world condition that we experience now is a sign of the end time.
On June 18, 1961, in the small Spanish village of San Sebastián de Garabandal, 4 girls were allegedly chosen by Mary to deliver an apocalyptic prophecy. Conchita Gonzalez and her 3 friends, Marie Loli, Jacinta, and Marie Cruz, ages 10 through 12, decided to steal apples from a neighbor's tree. They sat eating them on a rocky lane outside town.
And it's in that context that they experience a flash of light and claim that they have seen an angel. And that begins the experiences, the apparitions at Garabandal.
Beginning July 2nd, the girls supposedly experienced the first of more than 2,000 apparitions of the Virgin over a 4-year period. They would slip into an apparent deep trance, staring directly at a spot above them. With a priest looking on, villagers tested the visionaries by shining bright lights in their eyes, shaking them, even reportedly pricking them with pins. According to some observers, nothing seemed to shake them from their rapture. But not everyone shares the belief in the girls' visions.
Supposedly, if they prick you with a pin and you don't flinch, well, you must be so entranced. Well, in fact, a shrewd actor just doesn't flinch. In fact, there's just nothing to that test. It's silly.
The apparitions were notable not only for their frequency, but also for the girls' bizarre behavior during the course of the visions.
The abilities they demonstrated going to the apparition site and coming home back from the apparition site completely mesmerized the crowd. They would just seem to be flying up, and after the apparitions they would run backwards down the hill, and sometimes they would run backwards on their knees.
They were said to have excessive weight during their experiences, so that very strong men used to really handling big, heavy bundles couldn't pick them up.
As if these strange occurrences weren't enough, the villagers were then shocked by the seer's claim of Mary giving them a terrifying message. The end of the world was at hand, she said.
And it will begin with the visible sign, which they haven't described what it'll be, but it'll be something that everyone will see and no one will be able to deny. After that will come the warning, some event that will be a sign from God that you better repent, convert and repent now. And then the chastisement, which they've described as terrible, terrible events that will punish the wicked and elevate the righteous.
The Garabandal apparitions ended in 1965 under puzzling circumstances.
The seers said earlier that the Virgin had told them that they were going to disavow the apparition at one point. And in fact, they did disavow the apparition, and then shortly later said, I don't know why we said it wasn't true, it's always been true. And actually 3 of the 4 have maintained that apparitions were genuine.
Some Garabandal devotees explain the retractions as a result of pressure applied by the local church diocese. Although the seers no longer speak publicly, 3 of them insist that the apocalypse will happen in their lifetimes.
They have remained, since that time, ardent Catholics who feel that their lives were changed by what happened.
For every claim of visions of Mary throughout the centuries, church officials and communities have sought corroborative evidence to support it.
And so they begin to look for accompanying signs, perhaps clouds overhead that are meaningful symbols, sun miracles, sometimes seeing a pattern of color or lines that they read as a meaningful religious image.
The Catholic Church has long considered a healing miracle as the best evidence of an apparition and defines it precisely.
The rapid or instantaneous disappearance of a life-threatening symptom or a severe symptom like blindness without adequate treatment, without recovery period, without medical explanation, and without a relapse.
Healing miracles have been said to occur at several apparition sites, but one site in particular is long renowned by scholars and the faithful for its miraculous cures: Lourdes, France. For some 150 years, the shrine at Lourdes in the French Pyrenees has been a haven for the sick and afflicted from all over the world.
Lourdes is the preeminent healing shrine in Western Christianity.
In 1858, a 14-year-old illiterate peasant girl, Bernadette Soubirous, lived in abysmal poverty in Lourdes. On February 11th, Bernadette was gathering firewood along a riverbank when she heard a noise coming from the bush above a nearby grotto. Bernadette claimed to see something white in the form of a girl about her own age who carried a rosary. She did not identify the apparition as Mary.
She actually called the apparition a caro, which means that one or that girl in her dialect.
By the apparition's third appearance on February 18th, most villagers equated the figure with Mary. The vision was then said to have spoken with Bernadette, asking her to meet at the grotto for 15 additional days. Bernadette complied, each time standing stiffly, sometimes smiling, or moving her lips, as if communicating with an invisible being. Observers, though, found Bernadette's actions especially puzzling during what was described as yet another apparition on February 25th.
She crawled on her hands and knees and began scratching the dirt until she finally reached sort of bubbling mud, gurgling mud, and began smearing this mud, really, on her face and hands, and people didn't know what to think.
The apparition, it seemed, had directed Bernadette to drink and wash at the spot. Later that day, some villagers dug deeper there and found a spring. Almost immediately, miraculous cures were attributed to the water.
The water from Lourdes then becomes related to holy water, and so the whole significance of what goes on at Lourdes was built up around that spring as much as around the site of the apparition.
On March 2nd, Bernadette claimed the apparition had given her a message for the local priests. She said a shrine should be built on the grotto site, and people were to visit it in procession. But all was not well. The parish priest, Dominique Peyramal, considered Bernadette's pronouncements little more than an outrageous hoax.
She was really subjected to torturous scrutiny because of her class background.
Monsignor said to Bernadette, "Do you expect me to believe that you saw the Blessed Virgin?" And she said, "No, Monsignor, I don't expect you to believe it. It's not my job to get you to believe it. It's my job to tell you what she said."
The priest labeled Bernadette a liar. He demanded that she perform a test, ask the apparition to provide her name and a sign, make a rosebush bloom in the grotto. A crowd of 20,000 gathered on March 4th in anticipation. The sign failed to appear. Bernadette explained, saying the lady was angry with people's lack of faith. Some 3 weeks later, Bernadette asserted that the figure finally appeared again and identified herself.
In her final apparition, Bernadette said, the woman, Akero, had her arms at her chest in an attitude of prayer, and she opened them and said, "I am the Immaculate Conception." For people at the time, this was a stunning statement.
The Immaculate Conception, the belief that Mary was born free of original sin, was a dogma of the Catholic faith. It was explicit in the prayer of the Miraculous Medal, by then a staple of popular Roman Catholic devotion for nearly 2 decades. The grotto at Lourdes became an established shrine, despite the efforts of local officials to disparage all miraculous claims for the water. Not surprisingly, debate has continued over the spring's alleged supernatural properties.
At Lourdes, there's a beautiful saying: for those who do not believe, no explanation is possible. And for those who do believe, no explanation is necessary.
Only a relatively small number of cases, in fact, are officially authenticated as miraculous by the Lourdes Medical Bureau. Since 1884, the Bureau has been investigating and certifying miracles attributed to the shrine.
To be declared a miracle at Lourdes, first of all, one has to have complete medical documentation of one's condition prior to visiting the shrine. The cure must be instantaneous and complete. It must last for 5 years. All medical documentation then is submitted to an international community of physicians, not all of them necessarily Catholic. Of all of the hundreds and thousands of cures reported at Lourdes, only 66 have been declared miraculous.
Ironically, Bernadette endured ill health all her life. She suffered from asthma and never found relief from the water at Lourdes. 2 years after experiencing her apparitions, she entered a convent in Nevers.
She led a rather exemplary life, although it was tough. In the 19th century, there is a great deal of concern that a visionary and Bernadette not be prideful. And so Bernadette's sisters said no one swept the floor on her hands and knees, washed the floor more often than Bernadette did. She said, "I'm a broom, my purpose is finished, and now I'm put away in the corner."
Bernadette died in the convent on April 16, 1879, at age 35. She was declared a saint in 1933 by Pope Pius XI. The shrine at Lourdes continues to attract millions of supplicants each year.
Lourdes, I think, is elevated above all of the other apparitions in the history of the Church, not so much because of the events themselves, but because Bernadette Soubirous is considered the exemplar of all the visionaries who've had an apparition. The way she dealt with it, the way she reported it, the way she lived her life afterward is so admired within the Church.
Since the 3rd century AD, stories have been recorded of miraculous images of Mary and other religious figures or symbols that have suddenly appeared on church walls, windows, and other public places.
One of the ways that Mary appears to people has been in various kinds of objects. A piece of fruit that's sliced open and has an unusual texture. Leaves that fall from trees. The light on a particular building or piece of glass.
From the hundreds of images reported around the world, the faithful consider examples in Egypt and Ireland especially meaningful. In the 1870s, County Mayo was the center of a greatly troubled region in Ireland. Many who survived a devastating potato famine were stricken with a typhus epidemic.
This was one of the poorer corners of the country.
August 21st, 1879. In the village of Knock, several parishioners were walking near the local church. Suddenly, they noticed a strange brightness covering the south gable. A tableau of still figures appeared.
What they saw was the Virgin Mary, St. Joseph, and St. John the Evangelist in a tableau with an altar and a lamb. And the parishioners watched this tableau for a couple of hours, praying the rosary.
Though church investigators found the large number of eyewitnesses impressive, something else fascinated them even more.
Many other people in villages nearby or who weren't there and didn't see the vision reported seeing these incredibly vivid lights, that suddenly there was this luminous flare of light and that they could feel this atmospheric change. And the fact that it was the irreligious as well as the religious made it quite compelling.
So compelling, in fact, that the church began to consider the apparition at Knock as a profound event.
The biggest supernatural event we can have on an earthly level, the church calls a theophany, which is essentially heaven and earth meeting. And they don't think there are many of those. And Knock is included among those that they believe may have been a theophany.
Skeptics, however, believe the Knock apparition is only an optical illusion.
When you look carefully at the story, you see that they're talking about what's called a simulacrum. We're all familiar with the ink blot test or seeing pictures in clouds. That's the root of these apparitions, so-called.
Despite what skeptics may say, the event made a powerful impact on the faithful. Many, wanting a keepsake, took plaster from the side of the church. Believers maintain Mary visited Western Ireland because the destitute people were in dire need of hope and a helping hand.
The poor have devotion. Believing people need something to encourage them.
Over time, Knock became a healing shrine. And the apparition known as Our Lady of Knock, Queen of Ireland, gained worldwide attention.
You've had several popes who have visited the site and blessed it with their presence. Certainly, it has brought a degree of prosperity to the community at present, where there are hundreds of thousands of visitors every year. It's very much a part of the Marian world.
Some 90 years later, on the night of April 2nd, 1968, Muslim workers in Zaytun, Egypt, noticed something strange on top of St. Mary's Coptic Church. Eyewitnesses took these photographs that detractors insist have been doctored.
Lights were seen in the evening above the cathedral, and people looked up, and all of a sudden they saw this large apparition of a woman walking around the dome of the cathedral.
She was moving around the dome, and sometimes praying, and sometimes blessing, and sometimes moving her head downwards for a while.
I wasn't sure at the first glance that is it real or not. It might be reflections or shadows from the lights of the streets. But I got sure after a few seconds that she was a real woman standing there a few meters from my place. And the air was moving, the scarf on her head and on her shoulders. So that was amazing.
The apparition was said to last only a few minutes. But when the figure began to appear almost nightly, it was soon identified as Mary. The church became the object of a nightly vigil by many, including Muslims, who celebrate Mary for her prominent position in the Quran.
She's positioned all the way through the rest of the Quran as A, a woman of faith, and B, in the line of prophets. And C, anytime they mention Jesus in the Quran, it was also done with great reverence. He's always Jesus, the son of Mary. So that's like his label. He's identified by her name.
Soon, thousands reported seeing the figure of Mary on top of the church.
And the interesting thing is that first 10,000 people said they saw it, then 100,000 people said they saw it. Finally, there were more than 1 million people, and most of them not Christian, who said that they saw the Virgin Mary on this cathedral. One of them who said it was the president of Egypt, Gamal Nasser.
Then the news spread all over Egypt and abroad.
The local police believed the apparition was an elaborate hoax. They searched to uncover any device that could project an image.
No one found any hint of fraud or the attempt to reproduce these apparitions.
And the government of Egypt responded by initiating certainly the most lengthy and elaborate official investigation of a reported Marian apparition, and their voluminous report ends with them saying, we believe that people saw the Virgin Mary in a body of light on the cathedral.
Others have proposed an alternate explanation for the so-called apparition.
At least at one time period, there was something like 10 times the normal seismic activity there. and there's a possibility it was what's called earthquake lights.
Earthquake lights were first investigated by scientists in the 1930s. They are a luminous electromagnetic phenomenon associated with certain quakes. It was reported that the apparition on top of St. Mary's appeared hundreds of times over 3 years and lasted from a few minutes to as long as 9 hours. Although there was no message from Mary at Zaytun, some have interpreted her simple presence as having great significance for the faithful.
The Muslims, they consider that the Christians are blessed. They have St. Mary because they believe in her. And it makes some unity between some of the Muslims and the Christians.
In the 20th century, 2 series of Marian apparitions, one in Portugal, the other in Bosnia-Herzegovina, were deemed especially notable by scholars. They occurred within 36 years of one another. Each involved revelations of controversial secrets that many believed were prophetic about future world events.
Secrets are a fascinating phenomenon, one that I find most compelling in apparitions. People's attention is captured and maintained because they want to know what's going to happen.
On May 13th, 1917, 3 shepherd children, Lucia dos Santos, age 10, and her cousins, Jacinta and Francisco Marto, ages 7 and 9, were resting in a cove near the rural village of Fatima. An apparitional figure believed to be Mary appeared and told the children she had come from heaven. She then requested that they meet with her at the same spot on the 13th of each month through October. Word about the apparition spread quickly within the village and to outlying areas. During the July 13th apparition, some eyewitnesses reportedly became alarmed over Lucia's behavior.
She became very pale and cried out in terror. When people asked her afterwards what the lady said that was so unpleasant, she said, "It's a secret." And they said, "Is it good or bad?" And Lucia is reported to have said, "Good for some people and bad for others."
By August, the county mayor, Arturo Santo, made it his mission to obtain the secret. Santo was known for anti-religious sentiments. Accordingly, he subjected the children to brutal interrogations.
Secrets become a way of testing the visionaries. The visionary manages, in the face of lots of questioning, to resist telling their secret. That's considered a mark of authenticity.
By 1920, 3 years after the apparitions ended, Jacinta and Francisco succumbed to a flu epidemic that swept through Portugal. Lucia then became the sole keeper of the secret. In 1925, she entered a convent. And it wasn't until the 1940s that she began revealing the secret, bit by bit, in her memoirs. The secret, according to Lucia, had 3 parts. The first, a vision of hell, a place of awful torment, where poor sinners go, Mary said. The second part of the secret was a prophecy and a request from Mary to sanctify Russia.
But if it did not happen, there would be more wars, there would be fomentation of troubles in the church. In other words, disastrous things would happen.
The last much speculated third mystery of Fatima was sent by Lucia's bishop in 1957 to the Vatican, which finally released it in the year 2000. It prophesied the assassination of a bishop in white.
John Paul II sees himself in the figure of a white-robed a character that forms a part of this vision. John Paul II has always had a devotion to the Virgin Mary, but became especially devoted to Fatima when an assassination attempt on his life on May 13th, 1981 failed. May 13th is the first apparition of the Virgin to the children at Fatima. So people believe that, John Paul II believes that it was the Virgin of Fatima who saved him from this assassination attempt.
On May 13th, 1982, the Pope visited Fatima to place a bullet from the attack in the crown of the Virgin's statue. During other visits to Fatima, the Pope not only met with Sister Lucia, but on May 13, 2000, beatified her cousins Jacinta and Francisco Marto. The Fatima secret affected many Roman Catholics so profoundly that later Marian apparitions often repeated its dramatic scenarios. In the small Bosnian mountain village of Medjugorje, a complex Marian apparition involving secrets continues to unfold.
The apocalyptic prophecies at the heart of Medjugorje are much more ominous and immediate than they have been in previous apparitions.
On June 25th, 1981, 6 young people ranging in age from 10 to 20 began reporting daily appearances of the Virgin. After several months, the seers claimed Mary promised to give each of them 10 secrets. They were said to concern the Catholic Church and the whole world, and they were to be revealed gradually.
Are these 10 secrets all the same? Are there 10 individual secrets to each visionary? Are some of them the same and some of them different? We don't know. It's a fascinating question.
Some skepticism was focused on the young seers' identical behavior during their apparitions.
The fact that these kids would go silent in the same instant, speak in the same instant, fall to their knees in the same instant, see the Virgin in the same spot, these things were tested over and over.
Medical and scientific studies, including electroencephalograms that measure brain waves, were conducted on the visionaries as recently as 1998. It was concluded that the visionaries were healthy mentally and physically. They were not hallucinating or lying, and they were experiencing something unexplainable beyond scientific understanding.
It's claimed that during their experiences, the visionaries are in a trance state. Of course, the fact that they're in a trance state doesn't necessarily guarantee the content of their vision, but it's perceived by devotees to be a sign of authenticity.
By 2001, 3 of the visionaries, Mariana, Yakov, and Ivan, maintained they had received all 10 secrets.
And Blessed Mary always repeating, don't talk about secret, pray. But we, like human beings, we always talking about secret, but don't think about future, don't think what will happen. Will be God's will.
What they've said is that the secrets are revealed to them like a movie. They see it as if they're watching a movie, and that the last 3 are the most terrible things that they've ever seen or heard of, and that they can't think about them without becoming terribly frightened and unhappy.
Mary supposedly has allowed the 3rd secret to be known. The seers claim that at the conclusion of the apparitions, a permanent, indestructible, supernatural sign will emerge at Podbrodo Hill, the first Medjugorje apparition site.
Once the sign happened, the 3rd secret, it would be a period of the most terrible events in the history of the human race.
Some 20 million devotees have visited Medjugorje, making it one of the most frequented apparition sites in the world.
In the mid-1980s, there were large organized American pilgrimages to Yugoslavia. When people returned, they established Marian centers, they began publishing Marian newsletters, they began holding Marian conferences. And so the United States has, in the past couple of decades, seen a flourishing of apparitions and of public interest in apparitions to the Virgin.
In recent years, Marian apparition sites have sprung up across the United States. Apparition devotees are served by a large and expanding media network.
Chances are you will find something, less than a day's drive away. It's an event that you can go see.
July 13th, 2004, 8:30 a.m. An unforgivingly hot day in the Southern California desert. Amidst creosote brush and Joshua trees, the faithful begin their pilgrimage to a remote spot in the Mojave Desert. On the 13th of each month, this desolate setting becomes an apparition site for Our Lady of the Rock, as Mary is known here.
Interestingly, most apparitions occur at very precise times and very precise days. Mary originally appeared to the Fatima children in Portugal on the 13th, and a lot of these current apparitions actually follow that pattern, appear on the 13th of the month.
While waiting for the arrival of a charismatic visionary known to those assembled, pilgrims pray, hoping to be healed from disease, eager to experience a miracle.
You see the sun is spinning, you see a lot of stuff that happens in the sky. There's a lot of renovations. Virgin Mary is here.
I'm in renal failure. I've got other major problems. But the Blessed Mother has interceded for me. And I just am a happy person when I come out here.
I'm here because the Blessed Mother appears here. And she gives us messages.
Many here seek an understanding of themselves and the world they live in, and the one that comes after. A common ritual at this apparition site and others around the country is photographing purportedly miraculous shapes in the sky. The photos can be proof to the faithful that the apparition is authentic.
Pictures are often taken in hopes that strange lights or even the Virgin herself will appear on the film to substantiate her presence.
things show up like in the camera lens, whereas you don't see with your physical eye.
The Virgin Mary was just sideways, her face with a big veil. Another one, it was more like her hands were out. Yeah, I've gotten 2 pictures like that.
I was told that the Blessed Mother comes from the sun. So I was taking pictures of the sun the whole time. It was this great big oval with like stairs, and it had a steeple on the top.
An especially popular image is dubbed the Golden Door of Heaven, in reference to a biblical passage in the book of Revelation that says, "After this I looked, and behold, in heaven an open door." The allegedly supernatural pattern, seen only on Polaroid photographs, is captured by pointing the camera directly at the sun. Research indicates, though, that the so-called Door of Heaven photo could be an optical illusion.
When you shoot at something as bright as the sun, or you can do it right into a halogen lamp, you're just overloading it, so you get this very bright spot shaped like a doorway, and with rays of light coming out, and it looks like the doorway to heaven. Only it's actually the doorway into the camera.
At 11 a.m., 52-year-old Maria Paula Acuna arrives by van. She is Our Lady of the Rock's visionary. Accompanied by supporters, she prays with the crowd.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee.
While winding her way toward a makeshift altar, the place where she experiences the apparition. Maria Paula claims that she regularly sees Mary and has received messages from her since 1990.
The Holy Mother appeared, then told me that in Christ's name I should form an army for the service of God on earth. We're like the Sisters of Charity, a mission of faith. Mary's Sisters of Charity.
These people have just implicit faith in her, I believe, and in her visions.
Sí, buena señora. She appears very beautiful. She looks to be 16 or 17 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, and she has a face that's more heavenly than any face on earth. The voice of the Holy Virgin Mother is very smooth, like singing, like weeping. She speaks with a lot of emotion. I don't know why she chose me. Only God knows who He will call upon, who will serve Him in His eternal work.
So far, the messages Maria Paula has received from Mary have been anything but sunny. She speaks of admonitions to love one another and pray more frequently, as well as threats of imminent disaster.
She invited all the people to pray and to have faith, not to abandon God. If man wants, he can have peace on earth. But if man won't listen to her holy invitation, things will go from bad to worse.
There's a bit of a dark edge to some of her messages, you know, this sort of pray or else sort of attitude.
In September 1995, after spending more than a year investigating Maria Paula, the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles issued a letter to its priests. It declared that Our Lady of the Rock phenomenon did not earn church approval.
We had evidence from the beginning that people tended to go to this looking for miracles, looking for something spectacular to happen, and it wasn't necessarily connected to prayer. It's been said that there's a fine line between devotion and superstition. And when you venture into superstition, you venture into belief without support.
Maria Paula is not concerned about the Archdiocese's rejection of her ministry.
I feel peace because the word of heaven is what lights my way. I obey the law of the church on earth, but I also obey God. Obey His sacred commands to console my brethren, bringing them to the peace of God.
Devotees of Our Lady of the Rock don't seem bothered by the Church's decision on Maria Paula.
they're drawn out to this very remote area. You know, obviously they're faith-filled people. And she has a very strong connection with them, you know, an emotional connection, a spiritual connection. And these people, you know, you can see it in their faces. As she works her way around the crowd, they just want to touch her. They just want to be touched by her. Yeah, it's a very strong connection.
According to Christian tradition, God can choose to communicate with mankind any way he sees fit. The Catholic Church believes that, historically, one of those ways has been through Marian apparitions. For centuries, the Church has evaluated apparitions to determine their authenticity.
In the Church's view, there are various explanations for these things. One being they could be genuine. Two, they could be a delusion. And three, they could be diabolical, you know, the work of the devil.
The Church takes apparitions of the Blessed Mother very seriously, investigates them as much as they can, because the Church has a duty to make sure that the faithful are not being misled or misguided or harmed by an apparition.
In the 18th century, Pope Benedict XIV wrote that only after a careful investigation of an apparition could permission be granted to publicize the event for the instruction and good of the faithful.
Basically, Benedict XIV argued that apparitions are to be given no more than human faith. And they do not have the status of the scriptures, for example. And that after intense scrutiny, when an apparition is declared authentic, what that means is that it can be publicized, that a shrine can be established, but no Roman Catholic is actually required to believe in an apparition.
In 1978, the Vatican's Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith issued standard guidelines for bishops to assess claims of private revelation. The congregation stressed that the local bishop is the first and principal authority in apparition cases. However, in the most difficult circumstances, the congregation would be involved as well.
Eventually, papal approval would come by a visit of the Pope, or perhaps an allusion to that particular apparition on the part of the Pope. But it's nothing terribly formal. Not too many years ago, Pope John Paul II visited Fatima, and that was seen as a very high level of approval.
The Church's final judgment on whether or not an apparition is genuine depends largely on the personality of the seer.
Is this person psychologically stable? Are these events having good effects on this person's life? Is this, you know, a person who's humbly trying to follow the gospel? Any sort of showmanship or sensationalism is generally considered reason not to even proceed with the investigation.
Bernadette, the 14-year-old seer at Lourdes, France in 1858, has been used as the standard by which the Church evaluates all others.
If somebody is sent to me by a bishop who claims supernatural phenomena, I measure them against Lourdes. I measure them against Bernadette, her common sense, her complete lack of looking for importance, her lack of hysteria. A good witness says what happened. Bernadette is, I think, the witness par excellence.
The Church is also charged with judging the quality of any message from Mary said to be received by a seer.
The message must be completely consistent with the Christian faith and with the teachings of the Church, and it must also have a common sense about it. So I've talked to a number of people who told me that the whole world was going to blow up next Tuesday or things like that. But the teaching of the Church stands apart from any private revelation.
Out of some 80,000 Marian apparition claims since the 3rd century, only a small number have received approval by the Catholic Church.
Only 1% of all apparitions that have happened have ever been approved by the Church.
To date, that figure does not yet include any apparition in the United States. In Europe, among the earliest apparitions to gain approval were those of Catherine Labouré in 1830. The La Salette apparition in 1846 quickly gained church acceptance in spite of the non-pious character of the seers, Melanie and Maximin. Other apparitions to receive church approval include the image of Guadalupe, Lourdes, Knock, and Fatima.
The Church is very cautious. In a certain sense, it's putting its good name behind the apparition. Approval means you give it your good name, and they obviously want to be cautious. This is why there's a number of very popular reported apparitions at this present time which have not received church approval. The most obvious is Medjugorje and Garabandal.
Though some continue to support the apparitions that began in 1961 at Garabandal, Spain, the Church withdrew its support when several of the young seers retracted their statements. However, the reported apparitions of Mary to Croatian youth in Medjugorje, beginning in 1981, so far have been neither confirmed nor rejected by the Church.
The Pope himself is an ardent supporter of Medjugorje, and so are his closest advisors. But there are many people also within the hierarchy of the Church who are anti-Medjugorje, so they've clearly made a decision to let it sort of hang in the balance for, the next half century or so.
Millions who embrace Mary continue to travel to apparition sites, seeking and perhaps feeling what they need. To the faithful, Mary's messages can offer a voice of tenderness and restraint. Her image can comfort, providing a source of hope. Whether or not an apparition is authenticated by the Church, who could argue that belief in goodness, righteousness, and love, all that Mary truly represents, is the real miracle?